the #1 Costa Rica real estate and investment podcast, bringing you experts from all over Costa Rica.
Good morning, guys, and welcome to episode 219 of Costa Rica Real Estate and Investments with me, your host, Richard Beckson. Today, we're going to be talking with Shevonne Newton. She's the owner-broker of Rise Caribe. It's a real estate company based in Puerto Viejo on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica. So today, we're going to be talking to her about Caribbean life, investing in real estate over in those areas. I know that we've had quite a few people ask for to cover some more stuff on the Caribbean, so we're going to start to kind of include it a little bit more. Lots happening over there. I think it's one of the areas of the country when we were looking at data that had grown the most with regards to number of vacation rentals. So going to be very interesting chatting with her and kind of getting her viewpoint on what's happening in the real estate, you know, the living and investing areas there over on the Caribbean. Guys, we have quite a few investment projects kicking off at the moment. Phase 2, Arenal, Manuel Antonio, and other areas of Costa Rica. If anyone's interested about hearing more, feel free to email us info@investingcostarrica.com. That's info@investingcostarrica.com. We've done actually quite a few investments this year. I think it's probably about 5 or 6 kind of syndication style deals. So if anybody wants to get involved or just to hear about kind of what's going on there, feel free again to email us info@investingcostarrica.com. If you're enjoying the podcast, guys, please give us a review, a thumbs up, subscribe, so that every week when we release a new episode, you will be made aware. But enough of that. Let's get straight into the podcast. Good morning, Shevonne. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. How are you?
Very, very good. I always like to ask people kind of, especially on the Caribbean side, what the weather's like, because here on the Pacific, it's very cloudy today.
It's kind of the same right now, but here in the Caribbean, it changes drastically. I don't know what it does over on the West Coast, but we had sun for an hour and then it rained for 30 minutes and now it's cloudy.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's usually they say that like when it's sunny on the Pacific, it's raining on the Caribbean. When it's raining on when it's sunny on the Caribbean, it's raining on the Pacific.
They say that, but that's actually not true.
Yeah.
That's a myth I'd like to bust. It's
Oh, I'm sure we'll get into that during the podcast.
Yeah.
But my first question for you is, you know, I always like to get a kind of an update of what you're seeing happening in the markets. You know, there's been quite a bit of volatility based in the, you know, in the market and also politically. But I mean, what are you seeing happening in your area of the country in the Caribbean?
I mean, I've been here 10 years now, and I've been in real estate for almost 7 in total. And I would say in the past 7 years, we've seen a really steady incline, and it hasn't been crazy, but it's been very steady. Obviously, throughout COVID, it was actually a great time for us here. And we had, you know, what we called the gold rush. And so we had, you know, a big burst in sales just because I think too, the Caribbean was kind of discovered sort of for the first time, even by nationals during COVID. So we, you know, I've seen a little bit of a drop since COVID as far as real estate goes, but it hasn't dropped. Like it's still increasing every year. And I mean, I purchased land last year in an area here and I've already seen almost 100% increase, which is crazy. I don't like that's, you know, not the norm, but
it sounds like that's a little different to the Pacific coast, because again, last year to this year, there's been some settling of prices. In some areas, yes, prices have gone up, and in some areas, you know, it's been more, it's settling, especially in areas that, you know, kind of maybe saw rapid growth.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
So we have some parts that are settling, like some parts of the coastline that maybe were developed first, like 20, 25 years ago, that are starting to settle out in their pricing. But then we have some areas that are still increasing because they were the last to be developed, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to get an idea of like, you know, the high water tide mark for, you know, real estate 2019, because I see that as like the last real steady year, because then we went into kind of the steroid era, as I like to use it. So whenever comparing 2024 or even 2025, I always like to go back to 2019. If you were to compare to 2019, are you above that, at the same level, a little lower?
No, much higher than that.
Okay.
Much higher.
I mean, the high water tide markers, I would like to say, is much higher.
Yes. Yeah. So it is. Yeah. I mean, across the board down here from maritime zone land outwards to, you know, 20 minutes away from the ocean, it's all increased significantly.
Okay. I mean, a lot of people
even forget that Costa Rican has a Caribbean side sometimes, just because they're always talking about the Pacific, you know, the Four Seasons, the Waldorf, the Ritz-Carlton, Marriott, everything is all on the Pacific side, so it gets a lot of attention. But what are the main differences, would you say, between the two coastlines?
Those hotels don't exist here. That's one of them. But no, I would say this area is definitely more focused on conservation and ecotourism. And there's a lot of protected areas in this part of the coast, and there's a lot of natural wildlife because of it. And I think that's a huge draw, but it is different, right? It's not that all-inclusive hotel experience. It's a little bit more, I mean, it's getting better, but 10 years ago, it was a little bit more rough and tumble. You know, it wasn't, you know, the easygoing sort of vacation experience. Now it's definitely changing, and a lot of those conveniences that weren't there before are here now, or they're starting to be here. But it's definitely, the draw here is definitely animals, wildlife, conservation, and being in an area that still feels, you know, 20, 30 years behind what I call the real world.
Yep. How would you say, you know, I've always kind of described the Caribbean as like side of Costa Rica is if you took Costa Rica and the Caribbean in like a mix and then shook it up, if that makes sense, because there very much is a strong Caribbean vibe there.
Yes. No, the Afro-Caribbean culture here is amazing. The food is probably, in my opinion, some of the best I've experienced in all of Costa Rica. It's so good.
Yeah.
And not just the local food though, because there's also 150 more or less restaurants in a 15-kilometer coastline, and they're from all over the world. So what I love about this area is that it's, you know, a huge conglomerate of community, and there's people from Europe and Canada and the US and South America and all over, and they are all just kind of living here together and with the local community as well, which is really important.
Yeah. How does the weather compare, would you say? I mean, what are the typical weather patterns on the Caribbean?
So weather is completely unpredictable. We do not, like, the West Coast has a distinct dry and rainy season, right? And we do not have that. So everyone says it always, sorry, 1 second. Everyone always says that there's a distinct dry and wet season on the West Coast. But here, that's not the case. There is basically every day it rains a little bit, more or less, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. I thought I figured out the rhyme or reason, but then this past year, everything changed, and even the locals are like, we don't know the seasons anymore, because September and October is usually a really nice, dry summer season, is what we say here, but we've had constant rain all month, so I have no idea.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, usually September and October, people in Costa Rica are going to the Caribbean because usually the weather is a little better, but I had a friend I was talking to the other day that was at a wedding, and it was like, it just rained all day. Like, it's not normal.
No, it's not normal, but there's no way to predict it either. And that's what makes it tricky. Like, I had a whole open house for a development scheduled for last weekend, and it all got canceled because the rain was just torrential. And I thought we were booking it for a weekend that just really wouldn't have rain.
It's not. I think the beauty of Costa Rica, though, is that once it rains, you know it's going to stop. It's not like, you know, England, where like it starts raining and it can last weeks or sometimes like a month and just dreariness and grayness.
I mean, I'm from Vancouver originally, and
Okay, so
it rains in the same way. So yeah, we had 4 months straight of rain before there. So it does change.
What do you think would shock people when coming to the Caribbean?
Good question. I think it's hard because I've been here so long now. So now I'm like, what's the shocking thing? I think it's probably just in general the lack of convenience, or how far it is actually. So people underestimate that. It's a very small country, and it's not a lot of kilometers to get here, but to get here with traffic and the roads and everything, it's actually a bit of a journey. So I think people are always a little surprised by that at the beginning, because you do feel like you're stepping out of a car into another world, and it's not the convenience and the normal sort of brands and looks that you're expecting when you go traveling.
Yeah, I mean, very easy to get there. I think Santa has a flight to Le Mans now, so you can fly to Le Mans in like 20 minutes, and then from there, I mean, what are you, like 45 minutes to Puerto Viejo?
Correct. And that is a super convenient way. And, in the last 5 years, I haven't taken a shuttle or a car. I've taken that little hopper, but it's a tiny plane and it's a little freaky too.
Yeah, I don't know. I fly them like 4 times a week. So for me, it's like getting on a bus.
Yeah, no, it's really convenient, and they have a great track record, and they're a good company. So that is what a lot of our clients do now. I always say it's good to drive at least once from San Jose to Puerto Viejo just to get that feeling, because you go through 7 different microclimates between one and the other, and it's a cool experience. But I would say it's a little bit of a culture shock if you've never traveled anywhere, like just kind of arriving here, you feel like you're kind of in a different world for sure.
Yeah, I think different world is probably it's very, very different than any other part of Costa Rica, but that's the beauty of it. I mean, you could go, like, again, a lot of people connect it with either Aranao or they connect it to Turrialba because of it's like it's very easy, but they're very different destinations. Very, very different.
Yeah. And the only way, like I tell people this all the time, you won't know how it is until you come here, because it's a feeling. And I always say this too, that people come here and they either love it and they want to live here, or they hate it. It's a very interesting dynamic. It's not, there's no one here that's like, oh, I kind of like Puerto Viejo. It's love or hate.
Yeah. I think that there are other parts of Costa Rica where that doesn't probably exist. Like, it's a little bit more westernized and easier, if that makes sense. I mean, the Caribbean, the Caribbean.
Yes.
So,
yeah. The Caribbean is definitely the Caribbean. I mean, people mistake it all the time as being an island because it feels like an island. It has that sort of island life feel, but I have to remind everybody, it's not an island.
Exactly. I mean, what do you like most about the Caribbean?
Kind of a lot of what we just said. I mean, I decided to move here before I turned 30, and we moved here sight unseen, which was a little crazy, a little adventurous. But we had read about it, and I am very type A, but my husband was like, we're going. So we went, and I said, if I hate it after 1 year, we'll leave. And he's like, okay. And here we are 10 years later. So I think for me, the fact that it is so different from what we're used to in the real world, and the potential here is kind of limitless. You don't have all the competition of all the other businesses that exist in the world, and it's just growing, right? It's just at the beginning of its development. So the potential to kind of think outside the box. I mean, our motto is live outside the box. So is really exciting for me, at least it was, because I felt like in Canada, I didn't have room to really expand on, some of the original ideas I had, or some of the things I wanted to change or affect in the world in a different way. And here I have that potential. So
yeah. I mean, I think that's just the DNA of Costa Rica, just that boutiqueness and kind of freedom. You get it everywhere here. And, I think there's a lot of people that come to Costa Rica wanting to do big projects and big resorts. And like, there is a place for that, but it's so difficult. But in like the Caribbean, I think I wouldn't say impossible, but probably virtually impossible to do that stuff.
I would say virtually impossible is correct. Yeah. I mean, there's been attempts in the past 20 years for, big name hotels coming down here and doing their version of a big hotel. And it was nixed all the time by the community. Like, the community here is very protective over how it develops, which I love a lot too.
I like that because Costa Rica has, I say, like a natural rejection and community dive of projects that don't align with its values. I mean, I was in Mount Antonio yesterday, and there was an 16 or 18 story building that was about to be put up, and the community got behind it and stopped that project. And that's the beauty of this country, of like, communities can get together and stop things that they don't think agree with the community or like the natural setting of Costa Rica.
Exactly. And I mean, that's part of the big draw for me too. In Canada, in order to stop something in Canada, the US, or anywhere, I mean, that's virtually impossible. But here, your voice matters. Like, you can make a difference. And especially if you have, an established business, and we actually started a nonprofit foundation as well here, that coincides. And those two things give us a little bit more leverage to be able to affect positive change in the area.
Yeah, I mean, I sued actually the president and the health minister during the pandemic because they tried to come up with that QR code.
Did you
into
really?
restaurants. Yeah, that was us that got that one stopped. But like that's the beauty about it. Like you can stop that kind of stuff that's anti-constitutional.
We're gonna have to talk about that later
Okay.
because that's
I get
interesting.
myself involved in stuff sometimes, Shevonne, where I'm just like, my wife just goes, "What are you doing?" But
My husband's the same, don't
yeah,
worry.
exactly. I mean, from an investment perspective, where do you think the opportunity is on the Caribbean side? What's missing, or what do you need more of?
Honestly, we have a lot of hotels and vacation rentals. We're a little saturated in the vacation rental market, absolutely. Just because I mean, up until now, it's been pretty unregulated, but that's starting to change, as we know. But I would say any other business that draws community involvement in any way, whether that's recreation or, unique niche eco ideas, whatever that is, but some other business plan that we are really suffering for recreation in the area,
Yeah.
honestly. Like there's surfing and that's cool, but what do you do when it rains? And I was an athlete my whole life, and I have this little thing in the back of my head that wants to build this massive multiplex recreational center, but something like that would be great.
Huh. I mean, look, I think we're starting to see that stuff. There are certain evolutions in communities, and they've started to see a lot of that stuff up in the Pacific, and even down in the southern Pacific, like Oaxaca, that they've got kind of like, paddle courts and indoor tennis courts coming out now, and like just a lot of, as the community starts to develop, those things kind of come up, but
Exactly.
they're not always huge money makers, if that makes sense.
No, they're not. And I mean, for me, and this is I'm probably the worst salesperson ever by saying this, but
Usually the
I
best
don't,
salespeople are the worst.
yeah. I don't know if money should be the driving factor. If you're like, for the Caribbean, at least, if your driving factor is to make a buttload of money, this might not be the place for you.
Yep.
It's not meant for that, right? Like, I mean, people invest down here, they make money. There are boutique hotels that do really well for themselves, but nothing like the numbers that you're seeing on the West Coast. So if money is your focus, that might not be for here.
Yeah.
But if you want to live in a place that kind of gives you, as you said, that freedom to sort of disconnect from what the real world kind of brings you, and you want to, involve the community and help support the locals in the area, I think this is a great place for you. I mean, again, being a terrible salesperson, but gentrification happens everywhere, right? We can't stop.
Yeah.
But I mean, the reason why we got into real estate was so that we could try to have some sort of positive effect on what gentrification will do to an area like this. So that's why we started a foundation, and we give 10% of our real estate commissions go back to this foundation that helps to support different community projects. And I think having that as some part of that in your model of business will just help you be consistently successful. You're not going to make millions and millions and millions of dollars. That's just not going to happen here, but you can have a better quality of life, I think.
I mean, look, I know a lot of people with a lot of money, and the biggest problem is that they have a lot of money, and it frustrates them sometimes of like, what's enough? I'm constantly being like, what's enough?
Exactly.
And I think that that's a question you need to really ask yourself when you move to Costa Rica of like, what's enough?
Yes. And I had to learn that lesson very quickly. Like I said, we came here very unplanned, with not a lot of money. We were, silly kids, basically. Yep. And I come from a middle-class family in Canada, and I never struggled in that way. And then coming here with an online job that hadn't really been established yet, I realized I was really poor. And this is really poor. Like, I was counting the cost of eggs at one point. And so going through that was really enlightening, because then you realize what is important, and material possessions just aren't, especially here. People don't care. Like, I'm wearing makeup and, a nice dress right now for the podcast, but we don't makeup, doing your hair, like that's not a thing that happens here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot more focus on the quality of the human being here than what you actually have. Like, if you drive around, I remember once, I saw a guy driving around, and he just moved here, went out and got like a Porsche Cayenne, and I was like, dude, you're an idiot. And he was like, why? Like, you're moving to Costa Rica, you bought a Porsche, like, who's that for? That's for you, man. Like, but the local people are going to look at you and go, okay, this guy's an idiot. Like, you're sticking out like a sore thumb, man.
Exactly. So I would recommend not do that. definitely. Because too, like, people don't understand, I don't think either, that the legal minimum wage here is just under $3 an hour, which is not livable. It's an insane minimum wage. And so the locals are fighting always to make more money. And so we need to be really careful as foreigners and immigrants that we come in here and we don't hurt that even more, that we help it in every way that we can.
Yeah. I mean, we just kind of, that, you know, I was about to ask the question, what advice you'd give to anyone looking to make Costa Rica plan B? I think it's like, you know, try and take off that, you know, those keeping up with the Joneses cloak that usually people have here in Costa Rica. It doesn't really work. But I mean, what other advice would you have for people? Because again, I think due to the instability in the world and volatility, people look at Costa Rica as like a stable kind of place to potentially have a potential plan B if stuff does get a little crazy.
Yeah. I mean, Costa Rica, I just said this to my husband the other day, like, with everything that's going on in the world, from politics to weather to war to everything, I'm like, you know what? I'm so glad we're here. I'm so glad we're here, because we might not have all of the luxury conveniences that we would possibly have back home, but we feel safe and we feel happy and we get to be outside all the time, and our friends and our neighbors and our community is not talking about politics and is not caring about that. They truly care about the things that actually matter on a day-to-day basis. And that's the thing. They live day to day, which is the difference, right? The mindset is completely different. So I think for people wanting to move here, I totally encourage it, but I want people to be aware that you have to drop the things you've learned in the country you came from, because it doesn't work here in the same way. And you have to be willing to let that go, because if you don't, Costa Rica is really good at kicking you out. And I mean that energetically only, not actually. But if you come in with your, you know, preconceived ideas and philosophies about the way things should be, I've seen the craziest things happen, and I've never been an energy spiritual person ever in my life, but it's hilarious how quickly that change happens when people are not open to different possibilities.
I always say to people, like, look, it's either surf the wave or just go with the current, because it will sweep you away here.
Exactly.
There's nothing you can do. It will not change. You have to adapt to it.
And adaptation is the biggest thing. So come here, come to Costa Rica, you know, invest, but be sure you know how to adapt, or that you're prepared to adapt, because otherwise it'll force you to do it.
I mean, a big thing that we're seeing here in Costa Rica, and it was always something in the Caribbean, is crime. You know, and people bring it up. I mean, you know, I've always said that, like, look, Costa Rica is kind of a lot more opportunistic crime. That, like, when stuff's left out or like that kind of stuff, like, it's not often that you hear that, like, people are busting down doors and that kind of stuff. But maybe you can give us like a little bit of your opinion on that.
I'm pretty biased on this just because I've lived here now for 10 years, and then I've heard everything that's been said about the Caribbean.
Yep.
I've lived here as, you know, a woman for 10 years, and I have, knock on wood, never had any issues down here whatsoever. The biggest thing I've seen is petty theft, you know, and you still hear of instances where there are things that happen, you know, that are violent crimes, but it's way less than what it is in any big city, in my opinion. And I think to the Caribbean, if we, you know, even go back to really recent history, there is a racial component to a lot of the news that comes out, for sure. Huh. And I think Limon as a province is consistently being talked about as if it's, you know, dangerous and a bad place to go, and don't go there, because there's a lot of Black people. And I don't think that that's fair or justified. The Limon port area, any port town in Costa Rica, I mean, Punta Arenas is similar. Yep. It's not just here, but a port town has a different level of danger in Costa Rica, absolutely. But the port is an hour away. It doesn't even trickle down here that we see, honestly. And so for me, I'm not worried about crime or violent crime. Just don't be silly. Don't be a silly tourist, right? Like, don't leave your stuff out, and, you know, don't walk around at 2 o'clock in the morning drunk with all your stuff, like stuff like that. But you wouldn't do that in any city in the world either. So
no, I agree. I mean, look, I've said to people that, look, stuff happens here. It's opportunistic. But most of the stuff's happening in, like, the port towns, Limon, Punta Arenas, and, like, you know, I mean, it's because it's where stuff comes in and comes out.
Exactly.
And stuff does happen, but like I feel a lot safer here than I do anywhere else in the world.
Yeah. I feel much safer here walking around in the evening in town, like not in dark places, right? But in town than I did in like, this block of Vancouver that I would never go to, right? Like it's different.
Definitely. What areas of, the Caribbean do you think are going to see the most growth over the next 5 to 10 years?
Honestly, I would say Puerto Viejo is just continuously, when I say Puerto Viejo, it's not just the town, right? It includes all the beach towns in the 15-kilometer radius. So that's just continuing to develop. And because we're a little further behind than the West Coast, that's just going to continue, I think, for the next 5-10 years. The other one we're seeing steady growth in is Cahuita, which is 20 minutes north of here. And we actually have a satellite office in Cahuita, and that one's starting to pick up, and it's doing really well. And Cahuita is becoming more popular because it still has that kind of sleepy fishing village vibe. And the land's, half the price right now than Puerto Viejo. And so, and there's less people in general. There's a lot more people now than there were 10 years ago in Puerto Viejo. So,
yeah. Awesome. My last question for you, as I've kept you long enough, Shevonne. If you inherited $500,000 and you had to invest it into a business or real estate in Costa Rica, what would you invest it in and why?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I would do the thing that doesn't make me a lot of money, probably.
Yep.
But I would do probably one of those large recreational centers, like a rock climbing gym, gymnastics gym, football field, sportsplex, something like that. Or honestly, there's this amazing new ocean view development that we're selling that I'm trying to convince the owner to give me a really reduced price on, but it's kind of one of a kind right now because Ocean View is not super available down here.
Yep.
And they are minimum 5,000 square meter lots with 180-degree ocean view, and it's gorgeous. And so I would say one of those because they come in between 400 and 500K.
Wow. Yeah, it's Ocean View in the Caribbean is not always easy to get. So completely. Yeah, that's pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
So,
that's what I would do.
Shevonne, I very much appreciate your time to come here on the podcast and share kind of some of your knowledge. Anyone that wants to get in contact with you, I'll put all of your contact details down in the description, but very much appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Bye. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Guys, as you can see there, the Caribbean is really starting to develop. I think there is a new highway that's being developed from San Jose all the way down to Limon at the moment. It's been going on for quite a while. Probably will go on for quite a while sooner. But once that's fixed, it'll take a 4-hour drive, probably down to about 2.5. And it's absolutely beautiful out there. I know that the weather can be a little temperamental sometimes, but it's like I always say, it's like a cocktail mix of Costa Rica and the Caribbean, probably the best food in the country. And it just gets that Caribbean vibe. You can get on bikes and kind of cycle around. It's just very nicely put together and very different than anything on the Pacific. So I think if you guys like Costa Rica, definitely worth visiting the Caribbean. Again, it's a very different culture than the rest of Costa Rica. So just bear that in mind when going over there, but definitely worth visiting. Remember, guys, if you're looking to do anything here in Costa Rica, we develop, we build, we help invest, we help people basically, make sure that they're making the right decisions for them when it comes to relocation, investing, or real estate in Costa Rica. Feel free to email us. You can chat with one of our specialists here in the office, info@investingcostarica.com. That's info@investingcostarica.com. We have a lot of experience investing, developing, and guiding people to living or buying here in Costa Rica. As I say, nobody loses money on our watch, guys. So feel free to email us, info@investingcostarica.com. If you've enjoyed the podcast, guys, please give us a review, a thumbs up, subscribe, just to stay in contact with us. Or if you just would like to say hi, feel free to. A few people have reached out to us just to send an email saying, hey, Rich, thanks very much for all the work that you do. And, again, it just gives me, I would say, verification on the work that we're doing kind of over here, of just getting information out to you guys. But until the next podcast, we'll see you soon. Bye.
The #1 Costa Rica real estate and investment podcast, bringing you experts from all over Costa Rica.